What's going on, guys? Apathettic here with all your tips, recommendations, and everything in between. And today I'm going to walk you through step by step what is the best Solar Titan build in 2020. So we're covering everything from the subclass to use, the weapon loadouts you should focus on, and the stats and armor you should strive for on your Titan. So if you're someone who is looking for a sleeper Titan build that literally melts the enemy, you won't want to miss this. The last thing I'll add is a majority of my footage is captured during my streams on Twitch, so make sure you drop a follow using the link below if you want to see more gameplay like this live. With that, let's get into it. Before we get in depth into all the benefits of our subclass, we need to cover the basics. What this boils down to is having the best barricade, grenade, and jump selected for our subclass to ensure before we get into all the fancy subclass stuff that we have our foundation solidified. Starting with our barricade, and the options you're going to want to select is Towering Barricade. Towering Barricade has quickly become one of my favorite class abilities in Destiny 2 because of its many uses in so many situations. It can be used to proactively lock down a position or a pathway, especially in scenarios where you are near an enemy team spawn and you're trying to funnel the enemy in through a certain part of a doorway. This is one of my favorite ways to protect myself when engaging an enemy, as I'll drop the Titan barricade on my vulnerable side, creating a temporary wall, so now I can only be shot from one direction. You can also move freely through the shield, making it a lethal ability as well, as you can bait enemies into thinking you're going to stay hidden behind your shield, then slide out the last second and catch them off guard. I could go on and on about all the uses of the barricade, but the last thing I'll mention is that even with very low resilience, the cooldown on the barricade is quick, making an ability that we can use more liberally. Moving on to our grenade, we have two competitive options here between the incendiary grenade and the thermite grenade. And while I truly enjoy the ease of use of the incendiary grenade, the thermite grenade has actually become my new favorite grenade in Destiny 2 and probably one of the most slept on grenades in the game. This grenade, when thrown, sends forward a burning line of fire that does anywhere from 43 to 79 damage and sends multiple pulses of these lines of fire over time. The thermite grenade is an incredibly potent grenade and can be used so many different ways. It can be used to block off certain paths to keep enemies from pushing into our position, but unlike some other grenades, the thermite grenade has insane offensive potential, especially at the beginning of a match. Throwing this grenade proactively and taking advantage of its long line of fire allows us to aim it at a door, throw it at the ground, and have unsuspecting enemies walk right into it, leaving them very weak and easy to finish off. Because of the fact that this grenade pulses multiple times also means it can do significant damage to multiple enemies. One area this grenade lacks in comparison to something like a pulse grenade is pulse grenades are very good at locking down a very specific area like a zone or heavy spawn. With the thermite grenade, it can still lock down pathways, but on larger areas like a zone, it's not quite as effective since it lacks the radius of a pulse grenade. Overall, the thermite grenade has allowed me to string so many multi-kills together because of its range, damage output, and unpredictable nature, and is easily one of the best grenades in Destiny 2. Lastly, we have our jump, and for Titan, this choice is key. Since Titan skating got nerfed, Titan's mobility has been somewhat of a pain point of the class. With that said, strafe lift is going to be the option of choice here, since it gives us a good boost of momentum without sending us too high into the air. In classes like Titan and Warlock, having more linear movement makes us less likely to be caught unnecessarily floating too high and more likely to be taken out by the enemy team. Getting into our subclass of choice is the best solar subclass for PvP, and that's going to be Bottom Tree Sunbreaker. This subclass you don't see a lot in the Crucible, and part of that is due to how good Bottom Tree Striker is on Titan. Another reason is that Bottom Tree Sunbreaker has a little bit more of a skill ceiling to it, but once you master it, you realize how much synergy and survivability this subclass has, and it starts with the perk Soul Invictus. Solar ability kills restore your health. Grenade, melee ability, and some warrior leave a deadly sunspot in their wake. The key trait of Soul Invictus is the health regen. The ability to get a large chunk of health back from a solar ability kill is a game changer because it automatically boosts our survivability, and with Soul Invictus, it applies to all our abilities. Not to mention that these same kills we get will also leave a sunspot behind, which does additional damage and could potentially set us up for even more health regen. This perk really shines in close quarter engagements where you go in to finish the kill with a solar melee, which triggers the health regen, then also leaves behind the sunspot, which triggers Sun Warrior, which we will discuss later, but also does additional damage to another opponent who may be near, setting us up to secure a second melee kill easier due to the damage done from the sunspots. The other scenario is when you're able to get multiple kills with your thermite grenade and it leaves a ton of sunspots everywhere. This is great in corridors where the sunspots will limit how an enemy can advance on your position. One last thing I'll add is that the health regen is also active when using Hammer of Soul, which really is the icing on the cake of this ability. Soul Invictus is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the synergy and lethality we'll experience using this subclass. Next up, we have Endless Siege. Hammers create a sunspot on impact. While standing on sunspots, you throw hammers faster. Now we can't talk about Endless Siege without discussing our super Hammer of Soul. Hammer of Soul is a very strong super, and in my opinion is especially lethal in those super versus super battles. Because of the range, damage, and radius of the hitbox on your hammers, it makes it difficult to close the gap on this super, but then you throw in that whatever these hammers impact, they leave a sunspot doing even more damage, becomes even more difficult to defeat this super. Going beyond that, you can actually use this sunspot tactfully to increase how many hammers you throw. Upon popping your super, you could throw a hammer at the ground where you know you will walk, run into it, and throw hammers like crazy, making the super even more deadly. Not to mention, all the hammers you throw will leave behind even more sunspots, so you can tactfully run from sunspot to sunspot to get the most out of this powerful super. Moving on to the perk that ties this whole subclass together, and that's Sun Warrior. Passing through a sunspot causes your grenade and melee abilities to recharge faster and your super to last longer. It also increases all the damage you do. So Sun Warrior does a lot, and it ties in with every perk on this subclass tree. The first thing to highlight is how Sun Warrior is triggered by walking through one of your sunspots, which then triggers insane energy regen for a grenade and melee, but also gives a 20% damage boost in PvP. With Soul Invictus, when we get those solar ability kills, they will leave behind a sunspot that we can then use to trigger Sun Warrior, giving us a damage boost that lasts 5 seconds and continuously stay on the sunspot if we want to juice the regen on our abilities. Then, when we are on our super, we can use that same method of proactively creating a sunspot on the ground and standing on it to utilize Endless Siege and throw our hammers faster, but also with Sun Warrior, increase how long our super lasts. Sun Warrior is a perk that impacts our neutral game and lethality in our super in significant ways. This is why playing around your sunspots and using them as effectively as possible really takes this subclass to the next level. Taking advantage of your sunspots and the synergy they create takes this subclass from B tier to S tier. For our last perk in bottom tree Sunbreaker, we have Mortar Blast. Strike an enemy with this melee ability to release a solar explosion, setting nearby enemies on fire. Now this perk may sound like a standard solar melee, but is much more than that. The real highlights of this ability is the amount of damage it does. Against standard opponents, it does 90 damage with the initial melee and ticks for 10 damage for a good amount of time after that. What that results in is we don't need to do much damage in order to secure a kill, and even if we die, the burn damage on this ability usually kills most enemies. This ability is especially useful against supers. Landing a solid shotgun shot, then following up with Mortar Blast, and then watching your enemy burn out in their super is such a satisfying feeling, and for me is the main highlight of this ability. Not to mention that if you kill an enemy with this ability, it will leave a sunspot behind, triggering Sun Warrior for a damage boost and lets us get a head start in regenerating our abilities. High damage and long burn damage make Mortar Blast one of the most effective melee abilities in Destiny 2, and it rounds out bottom tree Sunbreaker nicely. Talking weapons and loadouts that pair best with this subclass, I'm going to separate this into 2 parts. One part for the players on console and the other part for the players on PC, but as a heads up, the recommendations for both platforms are basically the same. For my players on console, I recommend a close quarters loadout with this subclass, so for your special weapon, I would recommend running a shotgun of your choice. Personally, I lean towards aggressive frame options like Mindbender's Ambition or Astral Horizon, since these have the farthest one-hit kill range of any shotgun, and I personally find they are more consistent. For your primary on console, I recommend the 600 RPM auto of your choice, such as Gnawing Hunger or Summoner, as this archetype of auto rifle has the fastest optimal time to kill. For PC, the only difference in your loadout compared to console is you have 150 RPM hand cannons is a more viable option, but if you find yourself struggling against autos, don't hesitate to pull out your own Gnawing Hunger. As always, these are simply recommendations, so don't hesitate to use a loadout that fits your playstyle better or that you're more comfortable with. Next up, we are talking about armor stats you should be focusing on to get the most out of bottom tree Sunbreaker. For armor, I have some basic ground rules I follow to determine if it's worth keeping. The first rule is the armor roll has to be above 60 and for me to even consider masterworking it. Second, the armor has to have a majority of its distribution and 2 out of 3 stats I'm focusing on. As far as stats, recovery and intellect are going to be the way to go. For recovery, I don't settle for anything less than tier 10 for a couple of reasons. Recovery is going to reduce how long it takes for us to recover, which allows us to defend ourselves with more health when getting pushed, and also reduces our downtime in between fights and increases our chances of heading into our next fight full health. Secondly, we have intellect, which impacts how quickly and how many times per game we can get our super. For intellect, I find tier 7 or 8 to be the sweet spot, since after that you start seeing some diminishing returns. I also recommend running pump action or remote connection to gain extra super energy on special kills. As for other mods I highly recommend, running enhanced unflinching and targeting for whatever primary you may be using will allow your loadout to perform to its full potential. Also, you want to make sure you're running double scavengers on your boots for your special weapon of choice to ensure you're getting as much special ammo on pickup as possible. When it comes to exotics, Titan has some good options such as One-Eyed Mask and Doom Marchers, which both work great with any subclass. But for this build, we are going against the grain, so I chose exotics for this build that in my opinion are also solid options. The main exotic armor piece I ran was Hollow Fire Heart, which improves the recharge rate of your solar abilities and greatly increases the recharge rate when your super is charged. The reason I recommend Hollow Fire Heart is for the reduced cooldown on your abilities. This subclass brings so much synergy through your solar abilities that unless you've got god tier armor rules, you're going to want Hollow Fire Heart to reduce those cooldowns as much as possible. I felt Hollow Fire Heart gave me a great boost to my neutral game since it always felt like I had all my abilities ready to go. An honorable mention here for my team players out there though is Phoenix Cradle, which makes Sun Warrior last twice as long and allows allies to get Sun Warrior. The potential here is you could be constantly buffing your teammates with Sun Warrior, therefore decreasing the cooldowns for your entire team and simultaneously increasing their lethality. But again, use what exotic you feel best complements your playstyle and don't be afraid to experiment with exotics like Hollow Fire Heart. And if you're looking to perfect your builds on Hunter and Warlock, make sure you check out the videos on the screen to get all your characters dialed in and take your gameplay to the next level. As always, if you enjoyed, make sure you like, share, and subscribe as it's a free way to support me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.